And you're ready for me to use an exhibit, you can let me know, but if generally describe what's being proposed for this project with respect to the warehouses.
Sure. So let's go to sheet PB01B. It'll be the second page of that. There it is. So there's two buildings.
PB01B?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's
And
been
this has
submitted.
been submitted to the board. I don't know if we want to mark it as an exhibit. Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, we're going to mark this A4, and the witness would again describe what this is, who is the author of same, and the date.
So I am the author. It's dated 2/14/23, and these are the elevations of Building 1, which is the larger of the two buildings. These are companion buildings, so they have the same design features, so I thought it would be best to focus on this building since it's larger and closer to the road and more visible than the smaller building that's set back off the road. But pretty much everything I say about this building applies to the other one as well.
And which lot is this building on?
This is, I don't know the lot number.
And, well, lot 33, is that the lot that's closest to
Yes,
Homestead Road?
correct.
Just to have it out here.
So the buildings are constructed of concrete wall panels. They'll either be tilt-up or precast. Tilt-up or poured in the field, and precast come in on a truck, but they look the same once they're erected. They're painted three neutral colors: a light gray, a medium gray, and a dark gray. We like to keep these neutral because it helps them blend in to the surroundings better rather than using vivid colors. We also, since it's a speculative building with no known tenant, we wouldn't want to put, orange stripes on the building and then John Deere wants to come in with a green sign, and it's just better to keep them neutral. We apply the paint in more of a block pattern, so we like to use big areas of paint rather than horizontal stripes that just kind of go around the building, which turns it into a big layer cake and makes it look larger than it is. So we apply the paint in more of a blocked pattern in order to kind of minimize the scale.
Trying to get a bigger view. There we go.
That's okay. So everywhere there's a man door on the building, and they're hard to see on the elevation because they're small, but wherever there's a man door as opposed to a dock door, we have that panel painted the gray color, which gives the building a rhythm and also identifies where the man doors are. Some of them are egress doors, some of them are entrance doors, and some of them are firefighter access doors. But pretty much anywhere there's a vertical bar on the building, there's a door there. The elevations include clear story windows. That also helps provide more detail on the long elevations, and as well as allowing daylight to get inside the building for the workers once it's occupied. The height of the buildings is 39'11" from finished floor to the top of the parapet wall. And I know that there was questions. I think Mr. Coy had a comment in one of his review letters that I responded to addressing the height of the building. And we believe that our interpretation of the ordinance is the sides that face streets. So any side of the building that faces the road, the height of the building is 39'11". Now, that varies on the back side of the building at the docks because the grade is 4 feet lower at the dock doors in order for the truck to pull up. So that would be 43 feet 11, but that's only on the back side of the building that doesn't face a road.
And that, your response, that was your May 9th, 2023 letter?
Correct.
To the planning board?
That's right.
I guess, going through that, where you stated you were measuring height from the front of the building in the basically the midpoint. You just explain again how you kind of came up with that interpretation.
So I'm gonna read it so I don't get it wrong, but the definition of building height from the ordinance is the vertical distance from the grade to the top of the highest gable, slope of a hip roof, or otherwise the highest point of the roof. I'm going to stop there, and I think we interpret that to be to the top of the parapet wall because that's the highest point of the building that's visible from the roadways and the surrounding areas. So although it doesn't say top of a parapet wall, I think we agree that that's the correct place to measure building height to. And then it says, when a building faces on more than one street, the height shall be measured from the average of the grades at the center of each street front. So this building only faces on one street. The other building is kind of turned at an angle. So technically, the front side and the short side of the building face a street, but the grade is the same. It's that finished floor on both sides of those buildings, on both sides of that building. So the definition would apply either way, that it's not 39 foot 11 to the top of the parapet wall as seen from any road. So these are flat roof buildings. Flat is not really flat, but that's the architectural term for it. But it's got a minimal slope of 1/4 inch per foot, and the water goes to drains and then comes off the roof. Those roofs are designed to carry an extra 5 pounds per square foot for future photovoltaic panels, solar panels. New Jersey requires 40% of the roof to be designed that way. We design the whole roof that way. It gives latitude in the future to load up that big flat surface with solar panels for electric power. Some tenants will do that, others will not, but the building is equipped to do it. It also has an ESFR fire suppression system. That's a little different than a standard fire suppression system. ESFR stands for early suppression fast response, and so it's a deluge of water that is activated by heat or smoke, and it is intended to extinguish the fire. Most fire suppression systems are designed to control the fire long enough for the people to get out, but this system is designed to extinguish a fire. In my 35 years of experience, I have only seen those activated maybe 2 or 3 times, but they do work. Both of these buildings are set up as single-loaded buildings, so the docks are only on one side, and the smaller of the 2 buildings is designed as a single-tenant building. It only has one office corner. This building is designed as with 3 office elements, one at each corner and one at the middle, and we can go to the rendering and kind of talk about that. But in today's market, we've been seeing most of these buildings being leased by a single tenant, but this gives flexibility if the market changes in the future, that it could be up to 3, maybe even 4 tenants if they share that center entrance element. So,
if you can describe now what's on this on the screen, and we'll mark it as Exhibit A5.
Sure. So this is a rendering, and it could be either building. It's the same office corner on both buildings, dated. I'm sure it's the same. 12, 20, 21. So this is the rendering of the office corner. You can see that portion of the building has a lot more glass and a lot more detail than the rest of the building. Because it faces Homestead Road, you don't want any doubt when you pull into the site of where a visitor would go to enter the building. So all three of these office elements have substantial amount of glass. They have a canopy. They have inset doorways to provide shadow lines, a little bit different application of color than the rest of the building, and it just sets that element apart as the entrance. One other thing that we have done on the entrance corners is where you see that kind of medium gray above the glass, and then as it flanks that taller glass element, the medium gray that's above just the windows on the first floor, we've got very closely spaced reveals in those panels. That they lay down strips before they pour the concrete over it, and it makes reveals or rustication in the panels, and that gives it texture and a little more detail, and because that's where people will be walking, that you can actually see texture, so it helps to soften up that corner as well. Rooftop equipment on these buildings will be on, all the equipment is on the roof, the HVAC equipment, and we always hold it back at least one structural bay back from the parapet. So given the height of the building and the sight lines from a car or a pedestrian, you can't see the rooftop units because the top of the parapet wall cuts your view off to them. So even the office units, when we design the office, which there is no office design inside the building, that's dependent on a tenant later on, but we always have them push those units back one column bay so that you can't see them from the road. So that's pretty much the architecture of the buildings. I've also been asked to talk generally about operations of these buildings. It is a speculative building, and so there is no tenant that is known to give exact detail on, the number of occupants and the hours of operation and all the things that you'd want to know from an end user. But in this market, it's very common for these tenants to not commit to leasing a building until approvals are in place, and a lot of times until they see the building going vertical, to know that it's a real thing and to know that it's on schedule, because speed to market to them is the all-important factor. So it's hard to get a commitment until the approvals are in place, and then most of the time these will turn from a speculative building into a build-to-suit during construction, because somebody will sign on and then we'll start to incorporate any special features or needs or office fit-outs or whatever that they have. And at that point in time, signage would be known, that sort of stuff, and they would have to come back to planning board to get approvals on their tenant improvements. So typically, everything that happens at this site happens within the building. The only thing that happens outside these buildings is the trucks come in off the street, they circulate around the building, and they pull up to a dock door. And once they engage the building, the back doors of the trailer are opened, and the dock door is opened, and the forklifts go from inside the building to inside the trailer to unload it. They bring the goods into the building, they sort them, they stack them. Usually it's on racking. Sometimes it's just high pile floor storage. They sort them. Sometimes they repackage. Sometimes they send out smaller batches to different places, but it's all inside the building. So there's really nothing that happens out. They don't store materials outside the building. They don't unload trucks outside the building. There are 2 drive-in doors on each building at the ends of the truck courts. Those are typically used during construction, they're used a lot to get building materials inside the building. When a tenant signs on and they have their racking delivered and their equipment delivered, a lot of times that will come in on a flatbed that they pull inside the building to unload. And then when the building's in operation, some tenants don't use those doors at all. Others only use them to, maybe they'll pull a pickup truck with a blade on it to plow the parking lot. My experience is most of the biggest users hire that out, so they'll have somebody local that takes care of the lawn, the landscaping, and snow removal. Sometimes I've seen if they have large equipment or something that's hard to unload off of a enclosed trailer and it comes in on a flatbed, they will pull the flatbed into the building and unload it inside the building. Something like pipe, that would be hard to get out of the back of a trailer, but easier to get off the side of a trailer. Other than that, those doors are just there for a convenience.
With respect to the building and the floor plan, is there any area designated for servicing of trucks or maintenance of trucks?
No, that's not done on these sites.
And are there any comfort facilities for drivers to sleep and stay over in the facility?
No, they don't sleep or stay over. Most of them will have a shipping office somewhere on the dock wall, and as part of that shipping office, they have a trucker's lounge where the truck driver, when he pulls up to the dock, while they're unloading or loading his trailer, it gives them a place to go in the building and just sit. There's vending machines in there typically and a restroom, and it keeps them from sitting outside. They just go inside the building and hang out in there while they're waiting for their load to be unloaded or loaded.
And as part of one of the submissions back in May, we included a narrative of kind of proposed warehouse use and operations within the building. And is this the document that was submitted as part of the application?
That's correct. And this is really nothing more than an excerpt from the building code.
And we have this marked as Exhibit A6, titled Operations Description. And if you can just kind of generally discuss.
Why don't we mark it proposed versus, because it's proposed as your witness has testified, there are no tenants, and for all intents and purposes, this is a spec building.
So we're designing this building to meet the requirements of S1 and S2 use group. So that's different classifications of storage. S2 is low hazard storage, and there's a whole list, but it's generally things that are made out of metal, ceramic, stone, inert materials that will not ignite. So that's the lowest hazard. And then there's moderate hazard storage, that's S1, and that's things like paper, cardboard, limited amounts of expanded plastic for packaging, things that burn but don't create hazardous situation if they ignite. And then there's other additional classifications that keep getting more and more strict, all the way up to H, which is hazardous. There's very special construction required for that, and none of those uses would ever happen in this building because it's not being designed to accommodate those uses.
And in it, there was also kind of a general description of the shift in operations.
Typically, it's all over the place. Some users will only have an 8-hour shift, a day shift every day, all the way up to 24/7 operation. Sometimes that 24/7 is seasonal. Around the holidays, some of them will do maybe the last quarter of the year when they're working around the clock and then only have 2 shifts the rest of the year. So it can vary. I think typically we would want to get approval for 3 shifts, 24/7 operation, just to keep the maximum number of potential tenants in play.
And what about the maximum occupant load of the buildings?
So that varies too by tenant. We use a rule of thumb of about 1 person per 2,500 square feet. So typically it's driven more by the parking, because if there's Building 1 has 185 parking spaces. So any tenant that's going to have 200 people or more is not going to be attracted to this building because there's no place for their people to park. So the occupant load is typically driven by the parking that's provided. And now if they're a multiple shift operation, they typically would have less people in so that they have overlap for incoming employees to park while outgoing employees leave. So their shift sizes would be smaller. Typically, they stagger the shift times so that they don't have a big influx of people coming and going at the same time. They'll stagger them by half an hour to minimize that overlap in traffic. So, yeah, one person per 2,500 square feet is a generous amount, and there's really more parking than that provided. So the parking's going to govern on pretty much every tenant.
And what was the projection for the total number of employees?
So Building 1 has 185 parking spaces. So, and the planner's report has numbers in there too, and I will let her testify to how those numbers were determined. But if there's 185 parking spaces, they probably have some guest spaces. So, you're talking about 175 maximum people in Building 1 and about probably 85 in Building 2.
And with respect to each warehouse, how many loading bays are proposed, and kind of what is standard for determining that?
Loading bays, we just try to maximize the number that we can fit. You have the length of the building. They have to be a certain distance apart in order to get their dock leveler equipment and that between them. So we space them. 13'6" is kind of a generous spacing for dock doors. And so we just take the long wall of the building and we put as many dock doors on there. Now, if this building becomes a build-to-suit and a user doesn't need all those doors, some of those doors might turn into just places where they don't put dock equipment. They won't put the dock seals. They won't put the dock levelers on them. Sometimes they won't even put the door opening. We'll put a knockout panel in there that they could cut in later and add doors. But most users will not use every one of those dock doors. At least not at the same time for sure. But for design purposes and to give the greatest flexibility, we designed the building with the maximum number of dock doors that will fit on those dock walls.
And with this type of warehouse, how would you describe it with respect to the different types of, warehouses?
It's a general use warehouse. It's not a there are what they call last mile facilities, which are very goods come in here. They're packaged very small, and then they have box trucks or vans, or something of that nature. Pick those up and then deliver them kind of a very small radius to end users. That's usually a direct to consumer kind of a use. This building isn't set up to be one of those, and it can't be fulfillment center, what you typically think of as the big Amazon buildings. It's not set up for that either. Those buildings are much taller. They have extreme amounts of employee parking, so it's just not suitable for those users. So it's just a general warehouse.
And do you anticipate any automation in a facility this size?
Most of these users have some automation. Most of the time, it's not heavily automated.
And that's automation inside the building?
Inside the building. Yeah, it's, most of them have racking, and then it's hand picking, basically, guys on forklifts, or there might be a pick module that people can walk around and with baskets or boxes and package individual items, but it's usually more hand picking than automation. The automation is usually conveyors that once the goods are picked and put into a box, they'll go on a conveyor with a barcode reader and get sorted with that sort of stuff. But they're not highly automated.
And is there trailer parking also proposed?
Yes, the trailer parking is, and we can go to that was covered in the civil engineer's testimony, but the trailer parking's at the truck court only, and it's opposite of the docks, on the opposite of the drive.
And why, how many trailer parking spaces are there per park door?
It's usually 1-to-1. We try to get them 1-to-1 as close as we can. They're not as wide. They're 12 feet wide instead of 13.6, so we can fit a few more of them in there. But for both of these buildings, they're only at the loading dock, so they're not elsewhere on the site where trailers will be parked. All the trucks are confined to that side of the building.
And I have up on the screen a copy of the site rendering. I think this is previously marked as Exhibit A3. This is a color rendering prepared by Van Cleef Engineering, so that trailer parking you're referring to is kind of in the rear.
Correct.
And I'm sorry if I missed it, but why the double stacked on the smaller building back?
It's just a way to make usable space. Some users will use a double stack configuration, others will not. And if that's the case, they'll just have more maneuvering room between the single stacked and the docks.
And obviously, even showing the rendering, you have the buildings and the parking, and there's a lot of green space. How did you come up with the size of these buildings?
That's driven mostly by the site constraints. So civil engineer and the architect work closely together to try to figure out the buildable area, and then use, for economics, you try to use as much as you can to maximize the site. So there's a lot of green space on this site that can't be used for building. So as these sites go, this one's pretty, these buildings are small compared to the amount of land.
And looking through the board planner's memo, there was kind of a list of prohibited uses. You describe what those types of uses are, and if that's what's being called for here.
I don't know what's in the board planner's memo, but I mean,
With respect to the prohibited uses?
Is that the outside storage and those sort of things?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, like I said, there's no outside storage. Everything happens within the building. It's not a transfer facility. It's not a repair facility. It's just general warehousing.
And in your experience, have you ever worked on or designed truck terminals?
Yes.
Would you describe these buildings as truck terminals?
No.
And what are the differences?
A truck terminal is usually a very narrow building. It's cross-docked. The trucks pull up, and it's really more like a transfer station to where they will unload one trailer and load it into another trailer. Sometimes those buildings have spaces for one driver to disconnect a trailer and another driver to connect and take it the rest of the trip. But that's not what these are.
And with respect, so you've had an opportunity to review the board the board engineer and the board planner review letters, and really the architecture-related questions as to operations you addressed already.
Correct.
And the rest of them were either engineering or planning related.
That's correct. There was one other comment about, and I can't remember whose letter, but it was about having 15 feet clear above the docks, and the dock wall is flat, so there are no projections on the walls or anything above dock doors to impede a trailer. So
I guess going back, so we can maybe go to A4. If you kind of just, I guess, describe where he was talking about and where.
So that elevation number 4, the long elevation with all the dock doors on it, second one from the top. There you go. So there really are no obstructions. That's a flat wall at the dock doors, so there is no canopies. There are no, the doors aren't recessed into the wall in any way. It's just a flat wall, and so there are no obstructions above a trailer.
And you addressed that issue also in your May 9th, or in a separate May 9th, 2023 letter to the board, is that correct?
Correct.
I have nothing further direct examination of this witness, if there's any questions of the board or its professionals.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, you mentioned there'd be rooftop units. Do you know how tall those units would be?
Typically, it varies by manufacturer, but typically they're maybe 5 feet tall, and they're on about a 1 foot curb, so about 6 feet from the top of the roof to the top of the unit.
And how tall is the parapet wall proposed?
The parapet wall varies because the roof will slope up and down behind it, but it'll be roughly a foot. Might be 8 inches in some places and 1.5 feet in others, but roughly a foot.
You mentioned the rooftop units would be set back 1 bay from the building edge. How far would that be?
That's about 50, well, they're 50-foot bays in one direction and 54-foot bays in the other direction. So it'll be 54 feet from the ends of the building or 50 feet from the front of the building. The speed bay, where the loading docks are, is 60 feet. So it's quite a distance.
You mentioned that this is a general warehouse, in your opinion, and not a fulfillment center, and you gave some geometric reasons why configuration of the warehouse. You mentioned that this is not a last mile warehouse.
Correct.
But I didn't hear anything what separates this from, from an architectural standpoint.
It's a lot of it has to do with the site and the parking on the last mile facilities. They have huge parking lots for vans, and they have outdoor loading facilities. Usually there's some kind of a canopy that they drive through. Sometimes they pull into the building, and this building doesn't have any of those features, so it would not be used for that.
So I guess if I just follow up on that, with the last mile is typically the deliveries being made, so the deliveries
Correct.
being made by smaller
Right. The
van
Amazon trucks that you see in your neighborhood, that's where they pick up their loads and take them to deliver them.
So just so I can follow up and clarify, so it's not necessarily because of the architecture of the building, you're saying it's because of the way the site is planned?
Pretty much.
and I guess this could be addressed later, but what would prevent turning it into a last mile type warehouse in the future?
Well, they would have to redo all of the paving. They would have to expand the paving, which I don't know that there's room on the site to get enough additional paving to support that many vehicles.
And that would require coming back to the
Right,
board to
right,
change the site plan?
correct.
You mentioned there'd be no outside storage. Will trucks be parked loaded?
In the trailer parking spaces, potentially.
Thank you. That's all I have right now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. David?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, just bear with me one moment. I hit the wrong button. Good evening, Mr. Valenza. I just wanted to get clarification from your letter as it related to responding to me about our disagreement on how the building height should be calculated as it's written in the ordinance. Can you go over for the board and explain why you think that it's supposed to be from the center of the building?
So it says
From the center of the road, sorry, excuse me.
when a building faces on more than one street, the height shall be measured from the average of the grades at the center of each street front. So building 2, the smaller building, is at an angle to the road. So there's 2 faces of that building that can be seen from the street. But from the finished grade to the top of the parapet wall on both sides of those buildings is 39 feet 11 inches. So that one is an exact condition of what's written in the ordinance. Now, on building 1, there's only one side of the building that faces a road, but I don't know why the same thing wouldn't apply when 1 or 3 or 4 sides of the building face a road. If we're looking for the height of the building to not exceed a certain number at the sides that face roadways, then the side that faces the road is 39 feet 11. So I don't know why you would go to the back of the building that nobody sees from the roadway and calculate it differently when one side faces a road than when 2 sides. I just can't follow that logic. So that would be my interpretation of it, and just because it seems logical.
Okay. And in terms of when you were going over your description of the building, you were describing it as a general warehouse. Would you describe it, or can you explain what the difference is between a general warehouse and, say, a distribution center? And would you consider the use a distribution center?
Yeah, I don't know how you define distribution center, but we call these distribution centers. It's a distribution building. The material is taken off of one truck, stored, repackaged, and shipped out on another truck. So I think there's confusion between what we refer to as a fulfillment center, where it's more direct to consumer. I hate to keep using Amazon as the example, but they're the big gorilla that everybody knows. That is what we call a fulfillment center. They have a very, very large people load, occupant load, because they need all those people to do all that little packaging. So there's not enough parking here for a fulfillment center. There's not enough, it's not the right size for a fulfillment center.
What is the typical size of a fulfillment center?
Some of those that we do are 3.5 million square feet, all the way down to maybe 1 million.
How long would goods be stored? generally speaking?
Most of these operators want to turn that inventory quick. Now, we've done these buildings for like Wayfair, and some goods move faster than others, so they might be in there for a longer period of time. So it really varies by user, but they're not meant to be long-term storage facilities. It's goods are manufactured or brought in on a ship to the port and then brought to these buildings where they are turned back around and sent elsewhere. So
Do you have an approximate turnaround time?
I would think that, if something's in there for 6 months, it's a long time.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand what your definition of a general warehouse is. And the reason why I'm bringing that to everyone's attention is because I agree with you. There is confusion as to what some of these terms, how some of these terms are used. Is it fair to say that some in your profession would say that the difference between a general warehouse and a distribution center is how long the product stays within the warehouse in terms of throughput? In other words, you would tend to have a higher throughput if it was a distribution center as opposed to a traditional general warehouse.
I have never heard of that distinction.
Okay, so how would you distinguish the difference between a general warehouse and a distribution center?
It's one and the same.
Okay. Thank you.
I think it's just a different terminology.
Nothing further. Thank you.
I'll reserve, Mr. Chairman, until after the public and the objectors have. Thank you.
Okay. Board members?
Good evening, thank you. I do have a couple of follow-up questions. I've been on a lot of roofs, and a 1-foot parapet seems pretty small, safety-wise. You sure it's a foot? Is that OSHA safe? Is there going to be a railing on top of it?
The only reason you would have to put a railing up is if the roof access hatch is within 10 feet of the parapet wall, and we push them farther away because you don't want to see a railing on the edge of the roof. But the only reason these roofs are ever occupied is by somebody either doing repairs or maintaining the rooftop units, which aren't near the edge anyway. So,
Okay.
and
yes.
an extra foot of concrete all the way around the perimeter of these buildings is a huge cost. So, in addition to trying to minimize the height of the building, we also are trying to minimize the cost of the building because it doesn't
Well, there's
need
other
all
ways
the-
to do a parapet, but
Right.
I again, 1 foot just seems, and again, it's a
Yeah.
huge surface area,
Right,
and
right.
I understand it's maintenance, who's going to be up there, they got to do everything OSHA safe.
Correct.
So that was, as far as the, you said the construction was going to be precast panels, tilt-up construction,
tilt up or precast.
and approximately how many of those panels are there?
Well, I would have to do a lot of math to figure that out, but the panels, a tilt-up panel for this building would be about 27 feet wide-ish,
By 40 feet tall?
yes. And a precast panel would probably be, precasters make different widths of panels, but we would hope that we could find a precaster that would do a 13/6 panel because it works better with the dock door spacing. So there'd be twice as many panels if they're precast than there are if it's tilt-up. But it looks exactly the same once they're erected.
So it's the precast, tilt-up's a different,
Right.
I got it.
They're just different widths.
right. And then, so those are brought in on truck, obviously,
The tilt-up panels are cast on the
on the site.
on the
but
slab.
Precast, they're going to be shipped, they're going to be
Correct.
brought in by truck.
Correct.
Okay. And then, so, moving down your testimony. You mentioned 175 in Building 1 and 82 employees in Building 2. That's 257, but you had 219 up here. So that math doesn't quite work out as far as the number of people on a shift, one. So you might want to check that. Two, is the 219 or 257, whichever it is that per 8-hour shift?
Yes,
So it's 3 times that would be the potential number of employees and cars coming into the site.
correct.
So it's per 8-hour shift. Okay. And I think the last question I had, it was maybe to clarify what's going to go on in the trailer parking area. Is it going to be unhitched trailers? Is it going to be a full rig sitting there running?
No,
What are the operations in that area
so
going
the
to be like? Maybe describe that a little bit more.
So sometimes if a trailer needs to be unloaded and the dock that it needs to be unloaded from is occupied, they'll pull the trailer in there, not with the rig on it, disconnect, and then when that dock becomes available because the other truck left, then they'll move it over there. Or vice versa, they'll load a trailer, they'll get it out of that dock to be able to use it for another load and store it in the trailer parking until the truck driver shows up to hook it up and pull it off.
And how do they move it over there? Is there a special, is there a certain rig for the site, or I want to say like a dolly where they just can,
Yeah,
I
there's
forget what it's called.
yeah, there's a name for that. It's a small,
Like a tug or something?
right.
All right, that's all I had. Thank you. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I had a follow-up question. Sir, you mentioned that,
Sir, you mentioned the rooftop units may be approximately 5 feet sitting on a 1-foot curb for a total height of 6 feet. You also mentioned there might be photovoltaic panels. What would be the height of those if they were installed?
Those are typically low. It's a slight angle, so at one end they're lower and the other end they're higher, but they're usually a 20-something degree angle, so that they might be 1.5 feet off the roof at the high point.
And how close to the edge of the building would they be installed?
We keep them back from the edge, and they have to be a certain distance away from the rooftop units as well. So we design the whole roof to be able to carry them, but they don't use the whole roof surface. They'll be pushed back probably, at least 20, 30 feet.
Thank you.
Any other board members?
Yeah, I had one question.
Sure.
Maybe you covered this already, but the rooftop HVAC, what kind of noise does that emit? And is there any efforts made to position those in such a way that it's away from, areas of concern?
They typically, you can't hear them from the ground because sound sort of follows line of sight. So those sound waves are cut off by the edge of the building, just like your sight lines are cut off by them. And I've been up on these roofs several times when they're running, and you can walk right up to them and they're not terribly loud, but from the ground, you really don't hear them.
So just one thing, in your proposed operations memo, I know you had stated that it's not a fulfillment center, but I see the term consumer orders in this memo. Can
So-
you explain that?
Sometimes they will do a direct-to-consumer.
Okay. So this could be could consider to be a fulfillment center. You could have a tenant in here to do that.
They might do that. If they do that, it's usually in combination with bulk distribution as well. But yes, there could be.
Okay, so we can consider this distribution center / fulfillment center. based on your memo.
Yeah, but it's not a fulfillment, it's not configured as,
But it's a
it's a definition thing, but
direct-to-consumer,
yeah, it could be,
business
there
could
could
in
be
here.
direct to consumer,
Okay.
but I wouldn't think it's a fulfillment center
Yeah,
in
but
the
a
sense
portion
that
of it-
everybody thinks of them, because there's not the parking or the site available for the parking.
Right, but just trying to get a visual, because when we
Right.
hear the traffic engineer, I mean, now we're going to have
Yep.
to talk about small
Yes.
vehicles too, so. Okay. All right, no one else, I'm going to turn it over to the objectors.
Is there a particular order?
Mr. I was,
We'll let Mr. Tarantino go first because he grabbed the mic first.
yeah. My name is Brian Tarantino. I represent SWAT, which is a local community group interested in these applications. And Mr. Valencia, thanks for your testimony. Since you're covering both architecture and operations, I do have a number of questions for you. The first one is, the first one has to do with the TECD. My question is, please explain how you'll meet the requirement of the TECD F5D. And I can read that if that would be helpful to you.
Please.
Walls and fencing greater than 50 feet in length shall have a change in plane, height, material, or material texture, or significant landscape massing.
Building walls or site walls?
Walls and fencing greater than 50 feet in length shall have a change in plane, height, material, or material texture, or significant landscape massing.
So the landscaping has been covered by the civil engineer. The building walls do have a change in texture and color. There's very little change in height. The office does have some projections at the doorways and the canopies.
What are the lengths of those sections? I mean, I did a quick just thumbnail look at it. The picture on the bottom has about 13 different sections. The building is 1,025 feet long, so each of those sections would be 78 feet long. And then on the second from the top, where the loading docks are, there's 8 separate sections, and so each of those sections would be 128 feet long. So it doesn't seem that your drawing meets the TECD requirement.
Well, maybe Mr. Valencia can actually look at the regulation, and the title of this section is Decorative Walls, Fences, and Screen Design. And
Excuse me, could you
I'm
just
sorry.
give the section number? Please.
it's Ordinance Section 188-107.2. Is it F, I believe?
F5D.
F5.
Thank you.
And the section is dealing with decorative walls.
So I think that pertains to decorative screen walls and fences that are not the building walls. I mean,
Like if you used a retaining wall or some other type of wall in
yeah,
lieu of a fence.
or a screen wall or a sound wall or something that's a site amenity, not the building.
Where does it say that?
The building wall is not considered a decorative wall or a fence or a screening design. It's a decorative wall to me is a sound wall or a screen wall that is separate from the building.
So all it says is walls and fencing greater than 50 feet in length shall have a change in plane, height, material, and material texture. It doesn't say retaining walls. It doesn't say decorative walls. It doesn't say any of those things that you're saying.
I guess I would object to his characterization. It's under the title decorative walls. So any reference to walls in that section are decorative walls.
It says decorative walls, fences, and screening design.
So are you considering the building wall screening the inside of the building?
No, I'm saying that my understanding, we could ask the board this, but my understanding of this section is so that you wouldn't have one monolithic building that would be pretty ugly to the neighbors. The idea of it is that there is some decoration or some change in the design of it so that it doesn't look like, a big monolithic building.
Chairman, I'm going to object to the question. He's mischaracterizing the ordinance. There's a whole separate section, G, for architectural standards dealing with building design. It's clear it's dealing with decorative walls. The expert has answered the question as such. I would ask that we move on.
Okay.
Can you please explain how you'll meet the TECD requirement F4E, please? And I could read that for you if you would like.
Please.
Common areas shall be accessible from all buildings and connected by an on-site pedestrian circulation system. Sidewalks and plazas should be made comfortable for use by pedestrians through the use of landscaping, overhangs, and canopies in order to provide shade.
I'm going to object. Mr. Valenza's testimony was as to the building and building design. It was not as to pedestrian circulation, which the civil engineer already has addressed.
Mr. Giannetti, if he can't answer the question, have him testify to that.
In fact,
This is not for you to testify. There'll be a public comment portion. You ask him a
Mr.
question.
Giannetti, there's a question pending. Have your client answer the question. If Mr. Tarantino wants to follow up from that, he can.
My answer is I didn't design the site, so I can't address that question.
Well, Mr. Ford, when I posed this question to Mr. Ford, he referred me to you. I said, how are you meeting this requirement? He said, that's the architect who did the layout, and you need to ask him that. So I feel like I'm getting a little bit of a runaround on this question.
Okay, we're going to, because I'm trying to keep things concise. Your planner will answer that question.
Sure.
Okay. I do want to ask about the number of employees. As the board member pointed out, you have some differences in numbers here. I guess I'm curious as to what is the right number of estimated employees that you'll have for all three shifts.
So without a tenant, we can't give an exact number. So we work in rules of thumb, and the zoning ordinance has parking requirements, and so we back into numbers by, logically, you can't have more people than you have parking places. So that's why there's some discrepancy, because until a tenant is known, we're all working from rules of thumb and square feet per person and those kind of things. So I can't give you an exact number. We're just trying to get in the ballpark.
Okay, and your one person per 2,500 square feet, is that per shift, or is that for 3 shifts?
That's the number of people in the building at any time. So that would be
per shift.
per shift.
Okay. So based on the number of, so you gave a number of 219 per shift times 3 is 657. You also said that it's based on the number of parking spaces. There's 270 parking spaces. Times 3 would be 810 employees. And then based on the rule of thumb, one person per 2,500 square feet, it would be 440 times 3, or 1,320 employees. Those are very different numbers. I guess since we're anticipating that the traffic engineer will be coming up soon, and he's using those some number in his traffic estimate, which number should he use?
You'll have to ask him how he what number he uses in his calculations.
His report says, we will base our number based on operations. So he's looking for you to set a number.
Our traffic engineer is testifying next. He
No, I
can
think
address
your
how he came up
operation
with the
witness
traffic.
is going to answer that one. He's an engineer, he's going to go off of what the operations are going to be. This is you've represented this witness as your operation expert, so please answer the question.
So I'm going to answer it the same way I presented it the first time. There's a certain number of parking places, and that's the number of people that the site will support at any one time. So if we go off parking, that's the best I can do right now.
Okay, and that number is?
Uh, 185 at Building 1 and 96 at Building 2.
Oh, I got it wrong.
And if it's a multiple shift operation, those numbers would be less because they'll have to have parking, extra parking for shift changes. So if it's a one-shift operation, they can fill up every parking space without parking on the streets, which would be illegal, and so that's going to limit the occupants.
I'm just trying to do the math real quick.
So around 810?
So you're talking the number of people there in a day, and I'm talking the number of people in the building at any time.
Yeah.
I designed for occupant load because we're concerned with life safety and egress, and we use occupant load of the building. So those are the numbers that I use, but
Right.
I don't.
But it's 3
I don't-
shifts. You said it was 3 shifts, so you would logically multiply that by 3.
Logically, yes.
Okay. So 810.
Sure.
Okay, great. I'd like to talk about the operation of the docks. In your experience as an operations expert, what is the time it takes to unload a truck?
It could vary, but it's most of the time, those fork truck operators are pretty quick, and they unload and they put the materials right in the speed bay, that loading bay, before they distribute them back into the warehouse and sort them. So a truck could be unloaded in an hour-ish.
So 60 minutes. And then how long would it take to load?
Again, typically what they do is they stage the load in the speed bay so that it's all there. So when the truck pulls up, they're just moving at a short distance, and that's probably about the same amount of time.
Okay. So, so it's possible that for each dock, you could unload a truck could pull up, you could unload a truck, and then reload it, and it could pull away in 2 hours.
It's possible.
Okay. So then in an 8-hour shift, one truck dock could have 4 trucks. If they're 2 hours each and it's 8
Potentially.
hours in a shift, yeah. Okay. So one truck dock is 4 trucks, and if it's 3 shifts, that's how many in a day, in a 24-hour period for one truck dock?
What's the question?
So my question is, what you said was, we could, in one shift, a truck dock could turn around 4 trucks, come in and go
Right.
out. In 3 shifts, it would be how many?
12.
12, okay. So, and then you have 90 total truck docks? So, so if we did 90 times 12, do you know about how many that would be?
Way more than is ever going to happen, because that's not, these aren't in continuous use. Every dock is not being staged, loaded, and unloaded simultaneously in these buildings. So, we can do the math, but that's in reality not what happens.
So just, by the way, it's 1,080.
Okay.
So would there be anything that, like, if you had a certain tenant who really had a very high throughput, and it was, holidays, and they loaded up the place with 810 employees, and they really wanted to get them through, it's possible that it could approach that number. Is that true?
I don't think so, because you would need so many employees in the building to be able to do that, it's the math works, but in practicality, it doesn't work.
So what would be practical?
I don't know what's practical. I can tell you that there might be half a dozen trucks being loaded or unloaded at any time. It's not every door active at the same time. It varies by user, and I can't give you a solid number, but it's nowhere near every door being actively used 24/7 all day long. Hypothetically, yes, it could happen. Practically, I don't think it has ever happened that way.
You don't think it has ever happened that way?
I've never seen it happen that way.
So you've never seen it happen that way?
Correct.
Okay. But since we don't have a tenant, it's possible for it to happen. It's possible to get 810 employees in there, and it's possible that you could have upwards of 1,000 truck trips a day.
Mathematically, it's possible. Practically, I don't believe it's possible.
Okay. But there's no documentation that you've provided that provided an alternate estimate?
No.
Okay. You've equipped the building with 90 truck docks, and in your testimony, you said that you just basically put as many as you could fit.
That's how we do these to make the building attractive to the most potential users.
Do you have an idea of how much it costs to outfit a truck dock?
Not currently, because there's been huge fluctuations in commodity prices on that stuff. It also depends on what kind of levelers they use, if it's a mechanical leveler, if it's a hydraulic leveler. There's a lot of variables.
So could you give like a ballpark?
No, I don't have that information at my
Okay.
fingertips.
So, I mean, if it was $50,000, would that surprise you, or?
Objection, calls for speculation.
Okay, that's fair. So, given that there's a substantial investment that the owner would be making in these truck docks, would you expect that the docks would have very, very low utilization, or that they would want to get full, as much use as they could out of this expensive equipment?
Well, every owner approaches how they outfit the docks differently. Some of them put the cost of the docks in the lease of the building. Others put the cost of the docks on the tenant to supply. So there's different strategies for how that's done financially on these buildings.
Okay. Would it be possible to use this facility as a transshipment facility or cross dock? You said the building for a cross dock is typically narrow, but just because these buildings are not narrow, does that make it not possible, or is it still possible?
Well, it's cross dock means that there's dock doors on both sides of the building, and this only has dock doors on one side of the
Okay.
building.
All right, but transshipment, would transshipment be a possible use of this building based on the tenant?
I don't think so, no.
Well, and why is that?
Because who would lease this building that has all this area available for storage and only use the speed bay? Doesn't make financial sense.
Right. So not just a transshipment, but it's possible that some transshipment activity could occur. There's nothing that would prevent it based on the design of the facility. Is that correct?
Objection, I think it's been asked and answered.
Yeah.
No, actually, that was a different question.
I don't think, this is not set up as a transshipment facility, and I don't think it will be used as a transshipment facility.
Okay. You mentioned, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit to the emergency aspects of the facility. Do you have emergency plans for the facility? Like, are you expecting the local fire department to handle fires inside the warehouse?
Emergency plans are tenant-driven. We designed the building to be code compliant, and then the actual operations and safety plans and emergency plans is the operator's responsibility. But I can tell you that they all do have those plans. They have insurance requirements that they have to meet. There's a lot of checks and balances, but that's not my job.
And what about like first aid squad to respond to emergencies?
That's the operator's responsibility.
Okay. What security measures are planned for the facility? Will there be like a security fence to limit access?
We are not showing a security fence. If a tenant wants one, they're going to have to come back to planning board to ask for that to be added.
So there won't be any access control to the building? Somebody could walk through the woods and just walk right up to the building, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Will there be guards, maybe, to protect the building?
Potentially. It depends on the user. Sometimes they have a guardhouse that controls the truck traffic in and out of the building. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have a camera and a intercom that the truck driver will pull up to, and someone will allow them access. Sometimes there's free access.
When they do have guards, are they typically armed?
Not that I've seen, no.
Okay. Is there a guard building in the plan?
Inside the building?
No, in the plan for these buildings?
No.
There's
That would
no
be
guard
added
building.
by a tenant. If they desire that or need it, then they would add that and come back to planning board to ask for approval.
So how will the access, how will the control of trucks in and out of the facility be managed?
So the truck driver can just pull in off the street, drive around the building, and usually they know by their paperwork what dock they're supposed to go to, and they just pull up to it.
Have you seen facilities where there were trucks parked like on the street waiting to go in or parked in other places in the town? Franklin Township is a great example of this, where they have trucks parked.
Objection.
Have you seen these kinds of?
Objection assumes facts, not in evidence.
Mr. Tarantino asked the question without, I think the question is, has the witness seen situations where there are trucks parked outside of the facility boundaries?
I have.
In what manner?
Usually it's where there's not enough staging area or off-street stacking area for the trucks before they make it to the dock or to the truck court.
Can you pull
A
up-
very short driveway.
Mr. Giannetti, can you pull up, I believe it's Exhibit A4?
Oops.
Or that picture would do fine.
Wrong browser.
Okay,
This one?
that one,
Yeah.
thank you. You're defining Building 1 as the front building and Building 2 as the back building? 'Cause for the-
Correct.
Okay. Where's the staging area for Building 1?
So it's, see the long driveways on each short end of the building?
How long and how wide are they?
They're wide enough for 2 trucks to pass each other, and I don't know the length offhand, but
Is that planned for staging area?
yes, that would act as stacking area for tractor trailers. They can get off the road, and they, if they don't have a dock to go to, which would be unusual, that would accommodate truck stacking
The par-
without blocking the roadway.
Okay, the parking in the front of Building 1, and what I mean by front is the Homestead Road side.
Yes.
That's employee parking, is it not?
Correct.
So in order to allow employee parking to employees to come in and out of the facility, where would the trucks start to stack?
Well, if there was stacking occurring, the stacking would occur all the way at the back of the building before you make the 90-degree turn to get into the truck court. Correct.
So how long is that distance for those sides of the building?
Well, the width of that building is 360 feet, so you have another 60 feet of trailer apron, so you're up to 420, so about 420 feet.
And
Ish.
what's the average length of a tractor trailer?
I don't know the exact length. It's typically a 53-foot trailer plus whatever the rig is. Traffic engineer would be able to answer that question.
For the sake of this discussion, could we say 60 to 70 feet?
Sure.
So we're looking at 5 to 6 tractor trailers. Mr. Tarantino?
Yes, thank you. So we're just checking the documents. So those driveways on the left and the right of the building, short side, they're 24 feet in width. So if you had a truck parked there, would you be able to have, would any trucks be able to pass? Or trucks are typically, what, 12 feet wide?
It's not, it's for trucks to pass going in opposite directions. It's wide enough for 2 trucks.
Right, but if you had a, okay, so if you had a truck parked there, you wouldn't have two-way travel.
Yeah, I don't.
You'd be blocking one of the lanes, basically.
Sure, but it's not meant for truck parking. It would only be stacking while a truck maneuvers into a parking place, for lack of better terminology, but if a truck is maneuvering into a dock or parking a trailer and impeding the flow of another truck to come in, as soon as he backs up to that dock, that truck can start again. So the driveway is not a parking spot for trailers. It's a driveway.
But you're saying that it's possible that you would have trucks stopped there waiting to park?
For a very short duration while they're waiting for another truck to get out of their way.
Mr. Tarantino, can I interject a question?
Yes.
Because I just was thinking about this. Is the side of the building, both sides, we have a fire lane designated?
Yes. Well, yeah, the fire department wants to be able to access all sides of the building.
And how wide is that fire lane?
It's designed to accommodate their equipment, their truck. That was all, should have been all in the civil engineer's testimony of fire truck
Right.
access.
But we're talking about the use of those 2 sides of the building as a stacking point for truck traffic, not moving necessarily. So I'm going to just let everyone ponder that. I'm going to ask Mr. Mayhew to look into that when we have a break to see if we could allow, is it allowable to have stacking of trucks on the sides of the building? I don't have that in front of me, but I think that's something to consider.
Well, I think just to be clear, the testimony was, this is not a parking area. it would be.
A standing
it would be-
area.
it would
That
be
we know there's
waiting
going to be trucks idling.
For a very
and
short,
You can't.
only in certain instances and only for a limited period of time. It's not part of the daily operation that the trucks are going to stack and queue there.
And I also think if a truck was standing there waiting to get in and emergency equipment came, that they would not wait, they would get out of the way.
Well, we're speculating, so.
I mean,
Sure.
I think everybody's speculating.
Yes. But
we can come up
but-
with
That's what fire
But-
lanes are
but-
all about. You can
Right,
park
but
there
everybody's-
until there's a fire.
But before I allow you to continue.
Yes, sir.
Mike, it's been an hour and a half. You need a break? All right. We're going to take a 10-minute recess. It looks like it's 20 of on that clock, so we'll reconvene 10 of.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back in session, everyone.
Mr. Chairman, let the record reflect that Mr. Radowitz has left the meeting for the evening.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, Mr. Tarantino, I think I cut you off mid-sentence, so.
I'm used to it. No, that's fine. Anytime you want to interrupt me, I'm fine. So, Mr. Valenza, thank you for answering my questions. I appreciate it, and your patience. I appreciate the answers you're providing. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
But I do have a few more.
Go ahead.
So,
I figured so.
so I did want to ask about the parking spaces. So, what is is it possible? Since you don't know who the tenant is it possible that the tenant could use those parking spaces as a place to dispatch trucks?
I don't know why they would, because they're not near the docks.
No, I mean dispatch trucks to other locations, like off-site.
No, I've never seen that done before, where they put trucks in car parking lots.
Not car parking lots and truck. There's 137 truck parking spaces. So that's a lot in my estimation, especially on top of the 90 truck bays. So I'm curious, is it possible that some of those truck parking spaces could be used for trucks that get dispatched to other locations?
I guess anything's possible, but that's not what they use those for on these kind of facilities. Usually those transfer facilities are like right off an interstate where they go right off the highway, make the transfer, and go on their merry way. So
Generally,
I
warehouses
don't-
are like that too, by the way.
I don't see that happening on these buildings. So all I can tell you is what I've observed, and I've never observed that.
Right. So my specific question was, is it possible they could be used in that way? 137 spots, we're going to reserve some of them to dispatch trucks for other purposes from the facility.
I guess anything is possible, but again, I have never seen them used in that manner on any building that I've worked on. So,
Okay.
yes, it's possible, but that is not how they're utilized.
Okay, when we talk, and so what will all those 137 spaces be used for? That's a lot of space. That's a lot of real estate, it's a lot of asphalt. What are you going to use those, what would they typically be used for?
Trailer parking.
Okay, so there would be longish-term parking of trailers.
Trailers that aren't being loaded or unloaded at the time.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is a fair question, so if it's not, but is there provision for containing spills from parked trucks?
There's no requirement for spill containage. Usually, containment for spills is more related to like hazardous material transport, and since this is not designed to be a hazmat facility, I guess the only thing that can spill out of a truck is gasoline or motor oil.
Well, I mean, we have a list, right? We have a list of materials that it could be. It could be beverages and oils. They could be fuels, any number of materials
I mean,
that are
there-
allowed to be stored in the facility. They could be in those tractor trailers parked on on a relatively long-term basis. Is that right?
Yes, there's no requirement for containment of spills on those, and so we
Okay.
don't design that into the building.
Okay, so it's possible that a spill like that could go right into the Royce Brook, right behind the facility. It's possible?
I guess.
Can you repeat the question?
It's possible, is it possible that a spill from one of these parked trucks, since there's no spill containment, not required to be spill containment, could flow right off of the asphalt into the Royce Brook?
I don't think anything can flow, and that civil engineering testimony covered that already, but I don't think anything can flow directly into the brook without going into a rain garden or a storm detention basin. But that's not my area of expertise.
Okay.
Just to be clear, just to be clear, nowhere on our list do we say anything about the storage of fuels.
So let's talk about that for a second. So I think this truck that you were talking about that moves trailers around, I think might be called a mule. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not an expert, but I've heard it said, and I've learned a little bit about warehouses. So this mule, will it be roadworthy, or is it sort of dedicated to the facility?
I don't know for sure. Typically, they're only used in the yard, but I would think that they probably are roadworthy as well. I'm not positive.
Okay. So if they weren't, how would they be fueled?
That's a great question. I don't operate
Thanks.
these facilities. I'm just telling you what I see. So
Fueling of the mule
I guess
would
they
be
drive it down to the gas station and fuel it up.
So you're saying that these mules are not just roadworthy, but licensed for the road? Is that always the case in the buildings that you've seen?
I haven't got into that granular of detail on observing how those work.
But it's possible that...
I mean, there's laws that they have to follow in order to drive on the road or whatever, so I'm assuming they're doing things legally. That's...
Okay. And if it wasn't road legal, then there would need to be some provision of fueling there in the parking lot area, isn't that right?
Objection, again, calling for speculation, and the
This whole
witness...
thing is-
Go ahead. Objection is calling for speculation, and the witness has already testified to, he doesn't know how they're fueled or how they would get fueled.
Yeah, it's a great answer.
I would stick with that answer, Mr.
No, it's a good
Tarantino.
answer. I love that answer. Okay. Also, about the facility, so are you designing it with a cafeteria?
There is no interior fit out right now. That'll be dependent on what a tenant needs.
Okay. Given that the presence or lack of a cafeteria would impact the number of car trips in a day during a shift, what advice are you...
Objection, again, calling for speculation. No one's testified as to how the
I actually
cafeteria
didn't-
impacts.
I actually didn't finish my question.
But your first part of it was testifying, so that's
Why don't
calling...
you let Mr. Chinetti might solve the problem, make him ask the question, and then depending on when he's finished, you can object whichever way and we'll deal with it. But I will state as an overall, which I think the board is exceedingly well aware of, all of this is speculative since you have no proposed tenants. So any
No, but, well, I'm sorry, the
possible-
objection was wrong, that it was assuming facts, not in evidence. He likes to intro
they-
of testifying and then asking a question.
Mr. Tarantino?
Okay.
On that part, Mr. Giannetti recommended the board the objection be denied because there's very few facts that can be placed in evidence relative to the operations of this site, as your witness has already testified to multiple times.
So would you, Mr. Valenza, would you say that the presence or absence of a cafeteria would impact car trips in a given shift? So for instance, if there wasn't a cafeteria, that employees would have to go off-site for lunch?
I don't think so. I've never seen employees go on and off site during a shift. Typically, there's a break room and it's got refrigerators or vending machines, and they eat on site. They don't have a very long, they don't have a lunch hour. They might have a half an hour to eat, and so they don't come and go during a shift. There might be office personnel that do more than warehouse personnel. I don't know. It'll be up to the specific user, but typically the personnel do not leave during a shift.
Okay. So let's talk about the materials that could possibly be stored at the site. So I'm looking at I don't know what exhibit it is. It's titled Written Description of Proposed Warehouse Use and Operations.
A5, I believe.
I'm sorry?
That A4, A5, Mr. A5.
Okay.
Can we put that
Mr.
back up on the screen? Pictures keep getting better, Mr. Giannetti. That one. Thank you.
Okay. Can you just read the sentence at the bottom of that list?
What bottom?
Where exactly?
That right underneath washers and dryers.
Proposed storage group S1 occupancies are buildings occupied for storage uses that are not classified as group S2, including but not limited to storage of the following.
Okay. So this list of S2 materials is not an exhaustive list, is what I get from that. Is that true?
That's true.
Okay, so this list is merely an indication of the kinds of materials, but there are many other kinds of things that could be stored in these warehouse buildings. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay, so so it's not like it's a complete list.
No.
Okay. So, will there be any kind of wastes stored at the site, like waste soil or any kind of like refuse, scrap metal, any of those kinds of materials?
No, typically, these buildings don't generate a lot of trash or recyclables. Most of these users do separate recyclables from garbage. And for the most part, recyclables that come out of these buildings is cardboard, because things come boxed, and then the boxes are sometimes broken down and repackaged. So cardboard waste, and they typically have a compactor that they bundle it up and then have a waste hauler come in and take it away.
I guess my question, thank you for that. I guess my question is more, is it possible that a tenant would use the building to store wastes? Maybe containerized wastes?
Oh, no.
That's not possible?
Everything's possible, but I've never seen one of these facilities used as waste storage.
Okay, but it wouldn't be prohibited by your list, is what I'm saying.
As long as the waste is not
Hazardous waste.
hazardous.
Okay. Will there be compressed gases stored?
No, that would, most of those gases, flammable gases, compressed gases, aerosols, that sort of stuff is all H-use group, which this building's not designed as an H-use group facility.
Actually, aerosols is the first item on the list.
Aerosols are there's a way to store aerosols. The inherent danger in aerosol products is that when they get hot, they turn into missiles. So they're stored in a cage, basically, that so they can't go flying across the warehouse. So there's a way, and there's limited volumes of those that are allowable in these buildings, relatively small volumes, and they have to be kept in a cage.
And what regulation requires those controls?
The building code,
So the Hillsborough Building Code requires that?
the International Building Code, New Jersey version of the International Building Code.
Okay. Is it possible that the building would store plastic pellets?
Plastic pallets or pellets?
Pellets. There's a reason I ask, but if I just get the answer to your question.
I guess I've never seen plastic pellets stored in these buildings. I'd have to see the MSDS sheet on the material to understand whether it was allowable or not.
Just by the way, that was what was stored in the warehouse up on 206 that
Objection.
burned in 2016.
Objection, he's testifying again.
Sustained.
Will the facility manage shock-sensitive materials or lithium batteries?
I don't know. I don't know. I can't answer if the facility will manage anything because I don't know who the tenant is.
But it's possible.
No, objection, Chairman. You know, he can go through the entire list, but he's identified through the building code, and the building code has a category for the S1, S2, which allows certain products to be stored there, so long as they're not hazardous, and if there are ways for containment. So it's all governed by the building code. It's a warehouse. Stuff is allowed to be stored there so long as it conforms to the building code for an S1 or an S2 building. This is not a hazardous material building being proposed. So we're not going to spend all night him thinking of every single product that could potentially be stored here. It's all governed by the building code.
That's precisely the reason why I'm asking these questions, because the building code, the limit to the kinds of materials that are being stored was not presented, and these buildings are within yards of residential homes.
And it's a permitted use. It's a warehouse.
And
That's allowed to be permitted to store goods.
If I could finish my sentence, and therefore it's important to raise the question, is it possible that these kinds of dangerous materials, maybe not considered RCRA hazardous wastes, but still dangerous nonetheless if your bedroom is within a few hundred yards of the facility? That's why I'm asking the questions. Is it possible, Mr. Lorenza, that there would be any kind of product assembly in the building?
Potentially.
Okay. And how about like cleaning, disinfecting, sterilization, degreasing, acid washing, those kinds of things?
I don't design those facilities inside the building. That's a tenant-driven. A tenant has to determine how they maintain their building.
But it's possible.
I guess, sure.
Okay.
I mean, everybody has cleaning products.
Right. And like food processing?
Like an objection, Chairman. This is governed by the building code. Warehouses are permitted in this zone. We've testified it would be a S1 or S2 building code building. Stuff's allowed to be stored there. If
Indeed.
it's something that's not allowed to be stored there under the building code, it won't be stored there. But we can't play this game all night. I understand Mr. Tarantino's itching
Right.
to testify,
So.
and I'm itching to cross-examine
I'm
him.
gonna Cut to the chase to where you're at, because I'm looking at the building code, and I think your question would fall under motor vehicle repair garages. Is a permitted, is considered an S1 use,
Okay.
so.
Um,
So
The-
you can
the
go by
reason-
the definition of what repair could be.
Yeah, the reason that I'm asking these questions is because even though that might be allowed by the International Building Code, it may not be an appropriate use for adjacent to residential properties.
That's not determined by you. Warehouses are permitted under this application.
Yeah,
So-
nothing is
I'm-
determined
okay,
by me. I don't determine anything. All I do is ask
So
questions.
I'm just going to ask Mr. Bernstein that, no,
He's entitled to ask those questions
Right.
because the TCD, by oh, God. That's all right. I think Mr. Tarantino is entitled to ask those questions because the nature of the TCD zone, right, reasonable size and scope compared to the residential and the neighborhoods around it, he's entitled to ask, well, what's going to help be in there for those residential neighbors that are butting up against the warehouse? Because the TECD does have certain limitations. So I think he's entitled to go through this list, which was proposed.
but I think for time, I'm going to ask Mr. Bernstein, this board has the ability to restrict activities as it see fits, as a condition.
Within the concept of what potentially could or could not be used as proposed by the applicant. The applicant is indicating they're proposing the possibility of S1 or S2 group tenants. Within that context, if that is what the board finds is permissible within the township code, forgetting what the International Building Code is, they may be able to limit of that group what is and is not permitted.
Portions of buildings.
Okay.
Okay.
I can move on to another question. I think the not making, I don't make any determinations or
Right.
decisions, so. Sorry, Mr. Valenza, I got your name wrong. I apologize.
That's okay. It's been done before.
My last name is Tarantino, so they get that wrong, too. Based on your experience in terms of where these materials might be coming from, is it possible that they are, there would be shipping containers from overseas?
Yes.
Okay. And are those shipping containers typically inspected by government agencies prior to them being opened at the facility?
I believe they are.
100% inspected?
I don't know. I design buildings. I don't, I'm not a shipping.
But you're testifying on as an operations expert, isn't that right?
To the extent that I can, based on my experience as an architect.
Okay. So are you qualified to make any of these assertions with regard to the operation? I mean, I know that they asked you.
Objection. He's been qualified as an expert in the field of architecture. He gave his background in the design and operations of warehouses. He's not given any testimony nor given expertise as to how shipping containers are inspected off-site.
No, but I think a fair point, though, is you have presented him as your expert witness on operations. So if he can't answer the question, I know we've gone through this, he could say, I can't answer that particular question, but I think anything related directly to the operations of the facility is fair game.
So, okay, well, you answered the question that I asked. I think I might only have one more question, believe it or not, to double check. So you testified that that there would typically be, for the truck drivers, a break room and couches and restrooms.
Yes.
Okay, and would you characterize those as comfort facilities?
No, it's a place to sit while your truck's getting unloaded.
So what is a comfort facility then?
I don't know.
Okay.
I've never heard that terminology until this.
Okay. All right.
I mean, it's in the ordinance that you can't, but I don't know what it means in the ordinance. But it's not It's a place, all I can tell you is it's a place for the truck drivers to wait while their trucks are being loaded and unloaded.
Okay. But you don't have a definition in your mind of what a comfort facility is then?
No.
Okay, all right. I think those are all my questions. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
No
for it.
worries.
John Lanahan, objection number 2. I'm a resident of 43 Winding Way.
Get it closer, John. The mic.
My voice, I'm told, carries, but it doesn't here. So, Mr. Valenza, thank you.
Guy in the green tie.
I understand. Just a couple of quick questions about noise for a minute. The units on the roof, those are HVAC units?
Yes.
Anything else on those units?
Sometimes there's exhaust. Sometimes the exhaust is built into the same unit that provides heat, and sometimes they're separate units.
And how many units would fit on the roof for building number 1?
How many would fit, or how many
How many will
would they
go on?
need?
Yeah, I'm sorry, thank you. Not fit.
They
How
would-
many units would go on building number 1?
I would guess maybe 6,
And how many would go on building number 2?
maybe 4.
And do you know what the decibel level is for each unit?
I do not.
Do you have any estimate, from prior experience on what those decibels may be?
No.
Do the units come with any kind of guidelines or anything to tell you what to expect?
They probably do,
Okay.
but I don't know that
That's
information.
fine. Just want to make sure that I'm on the same page. So you're going to have 6, so there'll be roughly 10 units between the 2 buildings. Your proposed usage, if I can just pull it up again, there it is on the screen. So you're going to comply with the state level standards in NJAC 77:29-1.2. Before I get to that for a minute, so the trucks, well, how long will an average truck idle, do you think, on the property? Prior to loading, unloading, during loading, stacking? Any estimate on how many trucks might be idling at one time?
Sometimes,
I mean, we're proposing, just as a reminder, right? We're proposing operations 3 times 8-hour shifts, that's 24/7. So we're going to have 10 units on the roof going all at the same time. And how many trucks coming in and out do you think would be idling at any one time?
I'm going to defer that to the traffic engineer who's going to.
Fair enough. Do you know how long a truck typically would idle? Let's make it easy. If I'm
depends
coming
on-
in, if I'm coming,
Objection, he's,
no, I was just
when you
gonna-
ask a question, let him answer
let
the
him-
I'm
question.
sorry,
Mr.
got it,
Lin-
I got it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So there are some areas where they don't care if the truck is idling, and if it's cold outside, the truck will idle the whole time it's sitting there. Other times, there's signs on the wall that say no idling, and that driver is expected to back up to the dock, secure the trailer, and turn the motor off. So it's just the time it takes for him to back up to a dock, and then to start up and leave.
Thank you. Do you know if the proposed operations here have any, at this point, I'm guessing, I'm not going to guess, are there any rules at this point in time regarding idling at the facility?
They haven't been addressed yet, but I'm sure that would be a condition that would be acceptable.
And if it can be either a condition or maybe perhaps a tenant could also make those decisions, I guess, absent the township? Like, in other words, who normally makes those rules if the township doesn't?
If the township doesn't,
If the township is
then
silent on the idling?
nothing's
yeah.
posted, and the
Right.
drivers do whatever they want.
Okay, that's fine. And do you know how many decibels the average tractor-trailer truck gives off?
I don't.
Do you know how many decibels the average mule gives off?
I don't.
Do you know if these trucks, I'm assuming, will be all equipped with backup sirens?
Objection. Again, assumes facts, not in
No, I
evidence.
just said, do you know if they will be? Do you know if they will be with backup sirens?
I know that many trucks do have those, and I think they are capable of turning those off. So that would be another thing that can be posted.
If they're not turned off, do you know how many decibels they give off?
I don't.
Okay. The proposed, right, 3 8 by 8 hour shifts, 24/7. Would all, and I made a comment before, just to make sure that I was not assuming something. Do those units all run at the same time, or are they alternating? Are they backups? Does it depend on the occupancy? What determines how many units are running at once?
On the rooftop equipment,
Yep.
they're zoned, and they'll be controlled thermostatically, so they're each responsible for heating or ventilating a portion of the building, and they will kick on intermittently as needed. So there might be times when none of them are on, and there might be times when all of them are on.
That's what we have here. In those systems, you said there was exhaust systems, so those are fans in those systems?
Yes.
Okay. So we covered the HVAC units, the trucks, the mule. Are you also responsible for lighting? Is that part of your?
No, that's a civil engineer.
Okay. That's all I have. Thanks.
You guys want to switch lines?
Yep.
So while we're just setting up, I just have another question,
Sure.
since we're talking about equipment. Was there any designs for on-site generators, emergency power?
No, not as part of this building, but if a tenant needs emergency generator, then that would be part of their fit-out package that would have to come back.
Okay, so you haven't designed it?
Right.
Okay.
Good evening, Scott Gross, White Meadow Road, objector number 2. I'm Mr. Valenza. I wanted a few questions about the rooftop AC units.
Okay.
So you mentioned there are roughly 4 to 6 units on the big building. Is the entire warehouse planned to be fully air-conditioned?
No. Heated and ventilated.
During the summertime, it'd probably get pretty warm in there, I would think. How would you anticipate they would keep that space cool?
So typically what they do is they try to pull air through the building at night and then lock it down during the day. So they operationally, they control that by not leaving dock doors open. And it's not like an office environment, but they will get warm inside, and it's the standard of the industry to be heated and ventilated only.
And to not open the dock doors during the day?
Most of the time, the dock doors are not opened unless there's a trailer up against it. But there have been instances where I've heard of tenants opening the dock doors because it got hot in the building, which just exacerbates the problem. And once they're trained on how the system works, then they can control it better by not opening those dock doors. It's a hey, it's getting hot in here, let's open the windows kind of thing, and the buildings don't work that way.
Okay. So the space is heated, though?
It's
through
heated.
Through the rooftop units?
It's heated, and it's considered a semi-heated building. So the typical design parameters are 55 degrees inside when it's 0 degrees outside. So as it gets warmer outside, they can make it warmer inside the building, but typically it's 55-degree minimum when it's at 0 degrees outside.
Do you know what the source of heating is?
Gas, usually.
How do you anticipate the gas to be run? Would that be through the building itself or across the rooftop?
Typically it goes, across the rooftop. It's outside the building envelope. There have been fire marshals that have allowed the gas piping to run inside the building, but typically it's outside the building.
Are any sound attenuation panels or devices anticipated around the rooftop units?
No.
I'll move to the solar panels next.
Sure.
So do you know if they're planning on using a ballasted system or a mechanical system to prevent wind uplift?
It'll either be mechanically fastened or fully adhered, but there will be no ballast on the roof.
So
I just want to objection, and to be clear, there's been no testimony that we're proposing solar as part of the application. The
No,
roof is designed to accommodate it if someone wanted to propose it and get approvals, but there's no solar being proposed as part of this application.
Correct.
Okay. The last set of questions was on parking. You reviewed existing parking before. You've also stated that there was a lot of not undeveloped, but spaces on the property that do not have parking or buildings. That would indicate that there is room for more parking. Do you know how many more parking spaces could be accommodated on here without going past impervious coverage requirements?
I don't think there are very many other spaces available because there's easements and there's slopes and there's stormwater detention requirements that are using up the usable area of the site. So you might be able to squeeze a couple more parking places in somewhere, but it's not a big number.
Okay, I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Last objector? So you just came and hung out with us tonight?
I have nothing else to do tonight.
Okay. So before microphone, that's all right.
They were talking about the truck idling.
Still,
They were talking about the truck idling previously. There is New Jersey legislation on that. The EPA did it in 1986, because I remember this because we have warehousing, we have trucks near my office. It is only allowed to idle for 3 minutes, except for in certain circumstances. If it's below 15 degrees, if you have refrigeration. So they can't idle for more than 3 minutes at a time. Just
Correct. I was going to address that on redirect, but thank you.
sorry. I stole your thunder, sorry about that.
Okay. If there's anyone else from the board, 'cause I'm gonna,
I'll wait.
you're gonna wait? Okay, so I'm gonna, unless you have something to counter, Counselor, because I was gonna open the public.
I'm sorry, say that again?
No, I didn't know if you had any comments to counter, because I'm gonna ask for a motion to open the public.
If I have any redirect, it'll be after
Redirect,
public
okay.
comment.
All right, so may I have a motion to open the public?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, so now anyone from the public can come up and cross-examine the witness on his testimony from this evening only, please. And also state your name and address for the record.
I don't think this is working.
Okay, is it-
Save it.
Switch?
yeah, the top.
Pretty much.
Okay, thank you so much. Nancy Mattei, Mattei, at 6 Cornell Trail here in Hillsborough. Okay. I wanted to comment and ask regarding ingress and egress to the site. It looks like there's one large area of ingress and egress to the site, yes?
Might want to pull up
There-
A4.
For trucks and for cars?
There are 4 driveways off of Homestead Road
Okay.
into the site.
Okay, but there's one that's more predominantly larger than the other, yes?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So when employees come in, and we have a discrepancy about how many employees we have, but regardless, we can say possibly 200 employees on any shift. So when employees are coming in and trailers are coming in, and tractor trailers typically come in at the beginning of the shift and at the middle of the shift, there will be a lot of traffic into these in areas of ingress and egress. Has safety been addressed during, in the design of that?
So the design of that, the site driveways are designed by the civil engineer who already testified, and I don't design driveways and those kind of things, so I can't address that question.
It just seems to me that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to me that if we have a lot of convergence on the site, even with multiple areas of ingress and egress, there's going to be backed up traffic.
I'm going to let the
It's
traffic
objection, I
engineer,
mean,
the traffic engineer
there'll be a
can
time for public
address that.
there'll be a time for public comment.
Okay. Can you tell me how large the lounge area is and where it's located?
I cannot, because it'll be dependent on what a tenant's needs are.
Okay, so there's no design for a lounge area now?
Are you talking about the truckers' lounge?
Yes, truckers' lounge.
Yes, it's not part of the shell building, it'll be part of a tenant improvement package.
Okay.
So when a tenant comes along, they'll have requirements, and they'll want to make modifications to the building,
Okay.
and they will have to come back to planning board to get those approved.
Okay. And how many tenants do you think, what are the maximum number of tenants that could be accommodated at the larger site?
The larger site, I would say, the max would be 4. The
4.
larger building, 4 tenants. Probably one, because there's an office entrance at each end of the building, and then there's one in the middle, which could potentially split when you get inside
Right.
the building to have 2
Right.
tenants side by side.
Okay. And so are there any minimum subdivision areas built into the building?
No, that's flexible.
So that's all open?
That's
Okay.
flexible.
Okay, and that's based on tenant requirements and
Correct.
square footage requirements?
Yeah. There could be one tenant that uses 80% of the building and another one that uses 20% of the building. It
Okay.
doesn't necessarily have to be a 50-50 split.
Okay. I wanted to commend you, by the way, as to your selection for fire suppression. That's an excellent system. Can you tell me, is this an all-water-based system?
Yes.
Okay. And where is the source of the water? Are we using well water, city water, combination?
That's not determined yet, but it'll city water, and then it'll depend on volume and pressure that's available and whether we need a pump inside the building, but it'll be inside the building. The pipe goes underground, comes up inside the building, and all of that equipment is within the building itself.
Okay. And I guess my question as to that is, if there's a major fire, that's a lot of water. Are we sure that that site has the capacity? Have we talked to American Water on this? Have we had well designations for how much capacity exists?
I have not personally had those conversations, but I believe that flow tests have probably been done. It's not part of our scope.
Okay. Is there any part of the building that's been designated for battery charging stations?
Not yet.
Also tenant dependent?
Tenant dependent. Some of them will group a battery charging stations at one particular spot. Some of them will scatter them around the building. Some of them don't use battery-operated forklifts, they'll use propane. So it's tenant dependent.
Okay.
But there typically is some form of battery charging.
Okay, so there's nothing that's in the plan that's already exists for
No,
battery
because
charging
this is
station?
designed to be a shell that
Okay.
will then be
Okay.
fit out for a particular tenant's needs.
Okay. My question as to the fire suppression and the use of water is that if there are lithium-ion batteries, that water is not the suppressant that should be used. Whose responsibility is it to supply the right fire suppression for that? Is that incumbent upon the tenant? Do you do that based on tenant specificity?
Yes.
Or during
Yes.
the fit-up?
It's assumed right now that a water system, and a water system is suitable for all these uses that are outlined in the building code. But if there's some specific area within the building that's going to contain certain products that need a different system that'll be addressed as part of that tenant's needs.
Okay, very good. And in terms of the number of docks, we're talking 90 docks. As a planner, I'm sure that you have had
Just
visual...
objection, just to be clear, he's not a planner, he's an architect,
Well,
and he's
as
not
an-
giving planning testimony.
As an architect, I am sure that you have, observed other warehousing operations in addition to just studying them as in from a book or intellectually or anything like that. So you've seen other operations, and that's influenced your, and increased your capacity to design the perfect operation. So my question is, how many times have you seen facilities functioning at near 100% capacity?
Never.
Okay. And have they, and that's in all of your experience?
Yes.
Okay. Is it possible that this facility could be functioning at close to capacity and probably be able to accommodate that on a daily basis?
I don't believe so. Capacity is going to be limited to the workforce that's inside the building and the number of people that can park cars and work inside this facility won't be able to load that number of trucks. So,
Yeah, we have a difference of opinion as to what capacity is.
Yeah.
And the average load time and unload time is, you're more in the average of an hour, I'm more in the average of a half hour. And so that would increase the capacity significantly. So and I know the size of the building could certainly accommodate that. Do you have any idea of the distance between, has anybody ever approached you as to distance between possible stacks of materials, and is that how you determined length and width?
distance, you mean rack, the
Actual
spacing of the
storage,
racking?
Yeah, bases on, yeah.
It's tenant dependent, and there are kind of standards, but every tenant is working with different size modules, and so it's variable. So we designed the column grid at specific distances between columns that you can accommodate a large variation in the number of racks that fit between them.
Okay. And how heavily columned is the building?
The column grid is roughly 50 by 54.
Okay.
So
So those are good-sized bays.
yes.
So, and does every dock have a, so that you can offload quickly, does every dock have an overflow or a short-term stacking where other operators can bring material into the stacks?
So the structural bay between the dock wall and the first column line, we call that the speed bay, and that's the staging area.
Yeah, the
So-
staging bay is what
right.
we, yeah,
So-
staging bay is what
so
I've heard
they-
it referred to.
When they unload a truck, they don't take one pallet and go put it on a shelf and take
Right.
another pallet and go put it, they take it out of the truck and they stack it in that speed bay.
Right.
And then they take it from
Other
there.
operators take it and,
Right.
yeah, okay.
And vice versa. They'll-
Okay, so every bay has one of those?
Yes.
Okay, okay. And in terms of the docks themselves, are all of the, and this may not be a question for you, so you have to correct me and point me in the right direction if I'm asking the wrong question, but are all of these docks automatically fit up with load levelers and unloading doors that will only go up and down when a truck is coming in or going out?
Not necessarily. We show the number of dock positions that are available here, and then a decision will be made later on how each one is outfitted. So it could be anywhere from no equipment at all and not even an opening in the wall, but we put a knockout panel there that
Sure.
can be cut out to put a future dock position in there, to, full leveler, trailer restraint, dock bumpers, dock shelter package. So it could be anywhere in between there.
Okay. And is it the mule, Is the mule electronically operated from a central location, or is it programmed?
No,
How
I
is
think
the-
it's driven by a person.
So it is, so a human has interaction. Okay, very good. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening. I'm Keith Sherman, 16 Walnut Grove Road in Hillsborough. I have a few questions that probably mostly would have dealt with the traffic aspect, but I'll give it a shot.
I would just say, we have a traffic engineer testifying. If you have traffic questions, I would
Why don't
suggest.
we let him
Well,
ask
I'm not sure where some of it is in the development aspect, but anyway,
Mr. Giannetti, just let them ask the questions and you can deal with it accordingly.
I'm sorry.
Go on, sir.
What, was this particular site selected for any reason by the developer? Do you know?
You'd have to ask the developer.
And will the widening of Homestead Road at the entranceways be addressed as part of the development, or is that up to the responsibility of the municipality?
The widening of the roads.
For the entryway into the facility?
Are you referring to widening of Homestead Road? or
Yes,
are you refer-
yes,
okay.
yes.
Mike should have addressed that.
Or the traffic engineer?
Civil engineer, probably.
Or the traffic engineer?
The traffic, yeah, okay. And you already addressed the security gate. We won't know until there's a tenant. Provision for a truck turnaround at that facility if a truck ends up having to make a U-turn, essentially. That's not part of this.
Well, there's no need for a turnaround because there's driveways that go all the way around the perimeter of the building, so.
So for now, is without a tenant, we don't know.
Now,
The
on-
security would allow for the truck to just traverse the property and come
Yeah,
back out.
Yeah, they'll make that decision if they need to do something different for truck traffic, but I don't see that being necessary. And there is a turnaround area on the smaller building.
Okay, and we've discussed on-site parking. Will drivers be allowed to overnight if they run out of hours?
There's no sleeping facilities or anything.
Well, in their rig, but would they be allowed to park there and overnight?
I don't think so, especially if there's no idling.
So there's no, if a driver's out of hours, he's just stuck?
I don't know. I'm not a trucking expert, so.
Okay. Well, I'm just talking about the provision
Right.
of the property itself. They're not allowing for that on-site.
I've never seen
Or that
drivers
also could be tenant-driven,
spending the
I
night.
suppose?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't believe that I've ever seen one of these facilities where the drivers are spending the night there.
And propane storage on-site for the forklifts would be exterior, of course?
There's exempt amounts, small amounts within the building.
But I'm assuming a facility this size, if they were using propane
Yeah.
forklifts, there could be hundreds of propane tanks
Yeah,
stored outside.
I don't know how many or what size, but there's storage requirements for those that they have to.
But it would strictly be exterior?
No, there's exempt amounts that can be interior.
Build an interior bunker for it?
Right.
Folks, for those of you who are coming up to ask questions of the witness, could you please let them finish the answer before you move on to your next question, if nothing more for the board? So we can
Sorry.
hear the whole. No, it's basically you're talking over each other. I think
Gotcha.
you want a certain answer, the witness wants to answer it, and the board definitely wants to hear the answer, so let everybody just.
Sounds like a plan. The yard mules are going to be operated, I guess we also don't know if they're gas, electric, or whatever other. And subdivision, you said, is possible. And how long would construction typically take once you get the approval, barring any unusual circumstances?
I'm going to guess a year.
So from start to finish.
That's a rough number. There's site work that happens first, which is, that's the biggest variable probably. And then once the building starts going vertical, they go pretty quickly.
And, well, I guess the next one, I questioned where are the drivers going to wait for their appointments? If there's no on-site, they'd have to find some place around town.
Well,
If they have an
typically,
11 o'clock appointment and they're here at 9 in the morning,
oh, before they get to the site? Yeah, I don't know how they time their visits or trips or
well, you
whatever.
can't time it precisely, so that was my question. All these drivers that arrive early, waiting for their appointment times, have to be somewhere. And any cleanup necessary is the responsibility of the township. If there's an accident out on the road or it's outside the property, that's the township's responsibility.
An accident?
Objection is beyond the scope of this
Yeah.
witness.
Okay. Is that a traffic question? Or is
I don't
that-
even know
that's-
what question that is, frankly.
I don't know. What category is that?
That's probably a township
I mean,
question.
if you're talking about cleanup, like trucks leaving the site with muddy
If
tires
you
or
don't-
something,
that's all right.
there's regulations
If you're
for
not the
that.
person, that's fine.
Yeah.
And overweight trucks are not your problem. Illegally parked trucks are not your problem. You had stated before, you're not aware, but it could potentially be a drop yard. You know, all those empty parking spaces, I forget the number, 137 parking spaces could be utilized in that fashion where drivers would be coming and going, dropping and switching and picking up and switching. Possibly.
Possibly.
Yeah. And any possibility this is able to be a refrigerated building, or that's not?
Potentially, it's not being designed, the shell of it's not being designed for a refrigerated building, but it is possible to do what they call a box in a box, where they build refrigerated areas
Like a
within the
banana
building.
ripening thing.
Right.
And I guess that's all I have at the time. We're done for tonight, no more traffic?
No, we went
testimony
past
tonight?
that. I'm just hoping to get everyone
Okay, thank you.
to get their questions in. Thank you.
Hi, Joe O'Connell, 20 White Meadow Road. You testified that, when you were looking at all of this, that most of the stuff, it's the pretty side, I guess is what I would call it, is facing Homestead Road. So does that mean that the taller side of the building and where all the extra tractor trailer parking is and all the stacking would occur on the other side, close to the residence?
Yeah, it's on the back side of the building, so it's not
Close to
visible
the
from the road.
But it's visible from the residences?
Well, there's quite a distance, and there's a lot of vegetation, and civil engineers testified to that already. He presented sections and things through
Okay.
there to show how that's configured.
And with no tenant yet, there is then a potential for 24/7, 365 operation?
Yes.
With the noise and the fumes and all that encompasses that? Okay, and just clarifying, you did say it would be city water, not well water? I'm just concerned about the aquifer being depleted if there were something that was using a lot of
Well,
water.
the water department, I mean, the sprinkler system is not something that's used all the time or necessarily ever. It's tested once a year. The fire marshal comes and runs a test on it to make sure it's working properly.
But it would be city water that they would be using?
Yes, but it's not using water all the time. It's only in the event of an emergency when it would draw water.
Right. But in an event of emergency, you would use a lot of water. That's why I was concerned.
The way these systems work is it only activates the sprinkler heads that are required. So if there's a fire, the whole building doesn't get deluged with water, only that specific area.
Got it.
So it's it sounds like it would take a ton of water to put out a fire, but it's only certain portions of the sprinklers that would go off to extinguish that fire.
Okay, thank you.
Craig Berlin, Allshouse Street, Hillsborough. My question is, you've made it very clear that when planning as an architect, how this is all laid out, that the ground dictates a lot about where the building has to go. My question is, why, to further the point, why was the choice made, or why would someone make a choice to put the loading docks, which I would imagine are measurably louder? And we talked about line of sight, and that's such a great thing that, the line of sight with the fans on the roof, control the sound. Why would that be built on the northern end when there's three other ends, there's three other directions that the building can be pointed at, one of them just by merely flipping the building so that the docks and all of the noise and lights and everything else from the docks go towards the street where, if you'll look at your diagram, there's nothing there. There's no houses. There's nothing to bother. I mean, the argument being made here is, what accommodations have been made to the fact that this warehouse is in a residential area as opposed to putting this exact warehouse on 287?
There's a couple of reasons why we put docks where we do. The two short sides of the building are really not an option because it's too long of a path to empty a truck and then bring part of the load all the way down to the other end of the building. So you want that product to be closer to those staging bays to be more efficient inside the building. And then a lot of times the dock wall is dictated by the slope of the property because you have to be 4 feet lower at the docks. So you wouldn't put it on the high side, you'd put it on the low side.
This is a property being built from scratch, from the ground up. I would imagine it can be filled so that it sits however you need it to be filled.
Oh, sure, but we're trying to balance. You don't want to haul a bunch of fill dirt in or haul a bunch of fill dirt out, or there's trying to balance the site. We're trying to move as little dirt as possible.
In your opinion, would it make a substantial difference in the amount of sound that the residents nearby are exposed to?
No, I don't think so.
And why is that? Why would activity versus non-activity create less sound or the same sound? As trucks coming in and moving, when in the front is cars and people, and the back are 90 trucks, how is that sound compatible? I heard a lot of answers tonight, and I'll go into some of them, that don't make a lot of sense. And just because it's an answer doesn't mean it's a right answer. So my question is, how can you say that that's going to be, if you were to take sound levels once this is up, how can you say the front is going to be compatible or comparable to the back? Where all the activity is.
All right, objection. I'm not really even sure. There was multiple questions in there, but in the end, he has not testified as a noise expert. All he's testified is to the noise from the HVAC units on the roof. In the end, there are state regulations when you have an industrial use or a non-residential use next to a residential area, what noise levels you have to comply with. And this building, like any other building, will have to comply with that. And if we are in compliance, it's allowed to operate that way.
Once the building is up, how does that get monitored? Are you responsible for monitoring it? Is it something that we bring to the town's attention? What has been your experience? How do we know that when the building goes up, that it is, perhaps it meets the regulations and everything else? I just find it curious.
Objection again. Again, compound question. In the state law, in the state law as to noise, the noise regulations, there is a process and procedure if someone wants to make a noise complaint.
There's also a right of the board to establish procedures regarding noise issues prior to and or after, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again?
I said there are procedures and conditions that this board could place, depending on the application, regarding the establishment of noise levels prior to and after construction, correct?
I think if there was a foundational basis to mitigate noise, yes.
Have you presented a sound expert or noise expert? Barring none, then we would have the right to decide what we see as best fit.
Again, if there was a reasonable foundational basis for it, yes.
And we can determine that.
With the
Yes.
reasonable
That's it.
foundational basis, yes.
The answer is yes.
We can do it, yes.
Yes.
My next question is, why is it appropriate to have the docks facing the road in one building, but it's inappropriate in the second building? What leads you to the decision that that's where it belongs?
Those are railroad tracks, aren't they?
That's an answer. Thank you. I guess what I'd like to ask, just as a broad question, is my original question, which got kind of convoluted. So you can drop this as a warehouse here. You can drop it by a major road where there's no residents and there's no abatements needed or anything like that, and traffic issues are not an issue. I guess my question is, what accommodations were made to this project to make it more acceptable to a residential area as opposed to off a highway where you'll find most warehouses? What is it that you changed, or what is it that when you designed it, you said, this is in a residential area, so this would be more appropriate?
Objection. A, again, it's a compound question, and B, that's more appropriate for our planner as to planning and.
He's the designer.
He's the architect.
He's the architect of the building. He didn't do the entire layout of the property.
He didn't do the
planning it with respect to
So who chose,
the area.
okay, I'll ask the question. Who chose the orientation of that building on that lot? Did that
Both of
person?
them.
Huh?
Both buildings.
Both buildings. Who chose the orientation?
It's a.
Mr.
Well, that's the,
Chinetti, I
I
think
need to know who did it.
The
So
question,
that-
the
'cause that's
question
the
is
question.
for your client,
Right.
for your witness, not for you.
Right. So who, did you decide the orientation of both buildings?
The civil engineer takes the first stab at that, and then we work together to
Okay.
Make it
And in
work.
your consultation, I think what he was looking for is, you know, you're adjacent to a residential neighborhood, what accommodations or what thoughts went into it, as opposed if you were putting it, you know, adjacent to a non-residential.
And I think the civil engineer testified and had
But you just
sections
said-
and
you just
things and
testified-
talked about.
Let him, you ask him a question.
Adding plantings and the elevational differences, and showed the cross sections through there to illustrate how it was not impeding on the residences. So I rely on his testimony on that
Right,
topic.
but you consulted together, so you worked on it together, so you had the conversations directly with them. So to your best of your recollection, what did he state that he was, accommodations he was providing, knowing it was going up against a residential neighborhood? What did he do that was different than if it went against in a non-residential area?
It's mostly the grading and the landscaping to shield the building and the site. And again, he had exhibits showing the cross-section through there and where the new trees were going and where there were existing trees and the topography through there. So
What I'm referring to is a 180 swap. So if you have the same footprint that you have there, if you turned it this way and perhaps moved it north a little bit, it would fit. We know it would fit. It's a law of physics. You're not changing the size of the base, and you're not changing the side of the building. What it would do is it would give all of these people half a chance as far as the sound goes. It would provide some type of abatement of the sound. And again, I'm going to go back to my original question. What considerations were given that this was, or if the answer is none, the answer is
No,
none.
the answer's been asked and answered multiple times. There'll be
No, it
time to
has not.
testify as.
Yeah, he stated about the topography, the landscaping, that's what they utilized. But I think your question is
No,
why they didn't And was that ever a discussion,
No,
to do it 180?
No.
And have the, okay. So neither one of you thought about, took that into consideration, thinking it might be a good idea to have the bays facing Homestead Road?
no.
All right. They didn't.
I know that we're 10 o'clock and it's a long night, and I thank everybody. Just 2 points I wanted to bring up. Number one, when you're doing a count inside of the warehouse, I don't know a lot of people these days that work a 40-hour week in a warehouse. And
Objection, again, there'll be time for public comment.
Ask a
What is the
question.
legal limit for these buildings, or the fire limit, I should say, operationally, for how many people can be in the building at once, and does it accommodate the fact that people would be working overtime?
The building code has a stipulation for occupant load calculation. It doesn't have anything to do with the hours that a person works. It's just how many people. Yeah, it's based on egress. You have to calculate, and it's overkill. They use a bigger number to make sure there's sufficient exit capacity that people can get out of the building in case of an emergency.
Are you aware of what that number is?
Not off the top of my head. I'd have to do calculations to figure that out.
Is that important operationally to know what the capacity of the building is? We've spoken about how many people should be there because we measured parking spots, but on a practical basis and on a safety basis, do we know how many people we can fit in this building at one time?
No.
Okay. My last point that I'd like to bring is that I heard about disabling backup noises. I mean, I'm not sure that OSHA, are you aware that OSHA allows you to disable backup beeps or backup noises on trucks? And if you are, is there something you can point me towards? Because I know they're there for safety reasons, and you can't back up trucks. It's not put there as a nuisance. It's put there, it serves its function. Are you aware that OSHA says, yes, you can do that? It was an alternative you prescribed, not me.
I don't know the OSHA rules, but I know that I have seen that done before.
Okay, but it might not be appropriate. Would you agree?
I don't know.
Might not be
I
safe.
can only
Would
tell
you
you what
agree?
I've seen, and I've seen it done before, and that's all I can tell. I don't know the rules that are associated with it.
Okay. No more questions.
All right, we're coming towards the end. I'm just trying to just survey how many more are looking to add. All right, so we're going to wind up having to continue questioning because I have at least, because I saw 4 hands go up, so we're not getting to that tonight. So just be prepared to come back Thursday or next Thursday. But
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to follow up on a question that the last resident, Craig, asked Mr. Valencia about could the loading docks be on the left and right, and you mentioned that you wouldn't put loading docks on the short side of the building. And I just wanted to follow up and say, if the building was turned 90 degrees, perpendicular to Homestead Road, that would make the long side facing plan left. And if that was the case, then the loading docks would still stay on the long side of the building.
Potentially. I don't know, without doing some serious study, I don't know if that building will fit in that other direction.
I'm not asking if the same building would fit.
That would be
But
something.
My simple question is, if the building was turned 90 degrees and the loading docks were facing to the plan left, facing the other warehouse, and facing towards the bypass and the railroad, then that's where you would put the loading docks. It would still be on the long side of the building, correct?
Yeah, I don't know if you can get the slope from the road down to the docks in that short of a distance, but that civil engineer would have to figure that out, but there's challenges with it, but
This wasn't
potential.
meant to be all-inclusive. I just wanted to clarify. Your question, your answer to the homeowner was we wouldn't put the loading docks on that side because it's the short side. And so I wanted to follow up and say, if the building was turned 90 degrees and the long side faced
Correct.
interior, then you would put the
Yes.
That's all. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Yep,
Chairman.
no, thank you. Okay, so we've come to the end. It's after 10 o'clock.
It's not 10:30?
We do 3 hours. If we start at 7:30, well, like last year, then it'd be 10:30. But I don't think even in 20 minutes, we're going to get through 4 people. So, Mr. Coyce, just want to start to look at our calendar, and I think we need to have a discussion about extending time of decision. We do not have meetings in September available, other than the one that you're coming to next week. So that's why we need to see what's available on the calendar and then determine the extension of a time of decision.
And I guess just to be clear, for the next meeting, it is to finish the members of the public that haven't had an opportunity to ask questions. It's not reopening it all, to the objectors to ask again.
No, well, right.
But if there's redirect, that opens it up to the objectors again. I just want to make sure I understand the process.
I think that's up to the board at that time.
Oh, that's what I'm asking.
There's no automatic right to redirect or redirect.
That's what I'm just asking. I just want to
There are
understand.
members of the public who still have to ask questions. I have a few. At that point, it's up to you whether you want to redirect. I would indicate to the board that if you open up a redirect, then everybody will have a chance to question on recross as to what was discussed on redirect. That's a warning more for the public than it is for the objectors. So if you want to ask the witness more questions next week before redirect, that's the time, not on a redirect. If they come up with other questions between now and then, they can come up before redirect starts.
Yes, but if they've already asked questions, it's not coming up again to ask, that same person coming up to ask questions.
If they have a different question, I'll leave that to the board chair. I will tell you the general
Generally, I
rule.
don't allow for second bites. I think we're going to get more than enough answers through everyone's questioning that we've had already come, and the anticipated group of 4, and Mr. Bernstein.
Thank you.
Mr. Coyce, what do we have on the calendar available?
So at the moment, unless something changes between now and next week, the only, now the air conditioning turns on. We have December 14th is the only meeting that currently doesn't have something on the agenda. Other than that, all the other meetings have applications on the agenda. So that'd be December 14th.
And they're confirmed the other.
All those other applications have been confirmed for that date?
As of
Or
right,
the other dates?
As of right now, to the best of our knowledge, and I could certainly, between now and when you come back next week,
Yeah, I mean, I guess
definitely double check.
Yeah, from my standpoint, I think we've extended it to next week on the time to act. So I think at that point, we'll have a clear picture as to what we complete that night and what the rest of the schedule looks like.
Actually,
where we can address it.
the TOD is the September 30th, so.
Okay.
But the point is, I think the chair was trying to get, I don't think it's not incorrect or to have this at least go on another week. I'm assuming Mr.
Giannetti
and his client really don't want us to make a decision without everything on the record.
Right.
On all sides, unless he wants to come back again and start the
And
case
we
all
already
over.
know that one of the objectors has an expert that's going to be providing testimony.
I understand, but
So that's why I'm anticipating.
I think we all understand that, but I think next week we'll have a clearer picture as to all this and we'll be able to address it.
So I'm sorry, so for next week then, so that I'm clear, just on the calendar, what is expected next week, the testimony from?
Well, we're going to finish the public questioning.
Right.
And then I believe traffic engineering, and then hopefully we can get to the planner.
Okay, thanks.
It is my understanding, Mr. Giannetti, that Ms. Confone and Mr. Dean and Mr. Valencia are your last 3 witnesses?
Yes, as it
You may want to
stands.
check, there are reports that have been provided to the board which we have not had testimony to. If you wish them to be included for board consideration, we need the witnesses to come and testify.
Are there specific reports?
Well, the one that comes to mind right off the bat is Mr. Bernard for the community impact statement.
But I think Ms. Caffone's...
Ms. Caffone's testifying as to what somebody else wrote in a report.
Well, no, I think in her report, she indicated she reviewed it and agreed with his conclusion and analysis.
That's correct.
So,
Except his conclusion and analysis have not been placed before this board. We don't.
But she would be providing that testimony.
I'll advise the board accordingly. You can make that determination next week.
I mean, she can cut and paste his report and submit it under her name, but...
No, the report's already been submitted. She's relying on the report. The issue with the board will want...
I don't think she's relying on it. She's saying she's agreed with the report and the analysis.
The point is that that's a report potentially at issue. The board has to decide whether it wants to accept it or hear testimony.
Right.
I'm just asking the question, was there anybody else? That's the one that came to mind. There may be others.
I don't believe so, but I don't want to be foreclosed if we deem it necessary.
I'm not. I asked the question for similar type of reason. We're trying to figure out scheduling. It's my understanding that there are 2 objector witnesses.
I've got 2.
2?
Okay.
2.
What are the 2?
Good evening. So I actually do get to speak, I guess. Have Dr. Clay Emerson on stormwater management from Princeton Hydro. That report has been submitted for a while.
And Mr. Tarantino has a witness.
And Scott Gross has a witness, Ken Hausman on traffic. That report was submitted about a year ago.
Well, then thank you for allowing us. I wasn't aware of that one, so.
Yeah, and we would be bringing Carlos Rodriguez for planning.
And his report has also been submitted.
Correct.
Okay.
So we all got a little surprised here, Mr. Giannetti, tonight. We now have 3 objector witnesses. I thought it was 2, so I stand corrected.
Right.
So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at 5. We're looking at peers, 5+ witnesses,
Right.
Mr. Chairman, before the public.
No, but we got to see.
Why don't we, David?
Yeah, well, that's what we're going to do, right?
David,
Yeah.
why don't we?
Yeah, I mean, we will, we're going to confirm everybody that's currently on the calendar, but I think for everyone's benefit, I would take a look at your December 14th calendar, because I have a feeling we were going to be here on December 14th. I don't think we're going to get...
We're going to be here for somebody.
Well, true, but for those that are interested in this application, I'm expecting December 14th will be a date, and I'm not anticipating we're going to lose 2 or open up 2 nights.
The only other date I have to check between now and next week is November 2nd.
Okay.
So the only 2 possible dates would be November 2nd or December 14th, but more likely December 14th, because that's the only one that doesn't have anything penciled in.
But so,
Right.
so we're confirmed for the October dates?
Yes.
Yes.
I just want to make sure so no one has,
Yes.
there's no anticipation of October. So at best, we're looking
No.
at November 2nd.
And again, between now and then, I will verify.
Right, but I'm just, so everyone can anticipate their calendars, that November 2nd is a remote possibility, and then December 14th is a open date, so.
Understood.
So next week, we'll come back, and we will not schedule December 14th for anybody till after next week.
Understood.
Okay. Perfect. Is there any other business?
Mr. Chairman, a motion to continue this
Yes.
hearing to Thursday, September 14th, 2023 at 7 p.m. or soon thereafter as the matter may be heard without further notice.
Okay. May I have a motion to that effect?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
I'm sorry, who was the second? Thank you.
Okay, roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Mr. Chairman, before everybody starts heading for the exits, I have a procedural issue that I want to bring up that has come to my attention over the last 36 hours. I have a letter from Mr. Giannetti dated yesterday relative to some DEP-related matters. I have a letter from counsel for the Watershed Institute that was received today, which has not, neither of them, by the way, I think the September 6th may be, the September 7th has not yet made civic clerk. It appears, and counsel might want to come up to the spot, it appears that I'm being left with another one of my favorite quandaries, which is which one should I advise the board accordingly applies. So I am going to, I've done this in other applications, not with you, and I have two options. One, I can render an opinion to the board, I doubt it will happen by next Thursday, relative to what has been provided to me. If you, however, counsel, since you, I don't know whether you've reviewed Mr. Pizarro's letter, I don't have to answer yet, wish to respond to it before I make my response, and if you desperately need, we will talk about a SIR reply, and then I will provide an opinion letter based on that to all parties and my client as to what application the issue addresses. So, one, the letters will be up on Civic Clerk for those of you who are dying to read this. And two, you want to provide me something by next Thursday?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Early next week.
And then we'll figure out when we're here next Thursday about when and where.
Mhm.
But thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. I figured we'd get that part done as well.
Thank you. Okay. Barring any more comments, I will entertain a motion of adjournment. Okay, all in favor? Aye, we're adjourned. See everyone next Thursday at 7.